Raising kids is hard. I think it's safe to say that everybody has heard this statement before. But I'm here to tell you today that that is a complete lie. Hard doesn't even begin to describe what raising kids is like. Apparently, I like a challenge though, because I decided to raise 2 of them on my own in a country whose culture couldn't be more different than my own. But before we delve into that, let's have a look back at my childhood and upbringing. I feel really lucky to describe my childhood as I did it. I grew up in a really small town, in a traditional household with a loving mom and dad. My parents recently celebrated their 44th wedding anniversary, and they still live in the same house that I grew up in. You can see my bedroom window there in the middle. And yes, it is still called my bedroom. I experienced very little change growing up. I went to the local primary school for grade 1 to 7, and then I went to boarding school for high school in a slightly bigger town 25 minutes away. We spent 2 weeks at the beach in our caravan every July holiday, and a week up the mountains in January before school started. Weekends and other holidays were spent at my grandparents' house in a city 40 minutes away because they had a swimming pool. I was 21 years old before I saw the inside of a plane as I headed overseas for the first time. Now, this traditional upbringing is in stark contrast to the lives that my children are living. You see, my kids are ThirdCultureKids, or TCKs. A TCK is defined as someone who's grown up in a culture that is different to that of their parents. My kids have South African passports, but they were both born in China, and they have lived their whole lives here so far. Now I've had a brain fart. They have called 4 different cities home, they've moved apartments 8 times, and they have already attended 3 different schools, and the oldest has only just started grade 6. They were both less than a year old the first time they went on an overseas trip on a plane. And for them, visiting their grandparents involves 36 hours of international travel. Holidays are to exciting locations like Boracay, Kuala Lumpur, and Koh Samet. When I imagined myself as an adult, I always pictured my life going pretty much like my childhood did. I'd get married, buy a house, have kids, and definitely have a caravan for those fun family holidays. Easy. And it started out like that. I met a guy, I fell in love, and I got married. And then we decided to go to China for a year or 2. On our first wedding anniversary, we sat stuck at Xi'an Airport, and nothing has gone as I've planned since. If you had told me 14 years ago that I would still be in China and raising 2 kids on my own, I would have told you that you were crazy. And yet, here we are. When my daughter was about 4, a well-meaning man on the train asked her where she came from. And without hesitation, she said, China. The man looked at her confused and said, no, you're not from China. She got upset, as only she can, switched over to Chinese and told him that she was born in China, therefore she was Chinese, and he was rude for saying otherwise. This interaction hit a sore spot for me and had me questioning, am I doing it wrong? How did my child not know where she came from? I knew that something had to change. These interactions have happened a lot over the years, and slowly my kids have started to say, we're from China and South Africa, to finally saying we're from South Africa. To bring about this change, I had to ask myself, what I wanted, and why. It wasn't about my kids saying what country they came from. It was about fostering an appreciation for the country whose passport they held. It was important to create and maintain a connection to home. So I took opportunities for cultural education. I shared stories about my childhood and the things we did and the fun that we had. I told them about the good and the bad of the country that we come from. And when we go home to visit, we don't just visit people, we visit places. Last year, we had the opportunity to spend a few days at a private game reserve. And as my kids sat in an open vehicle next to a pride of lions, the awe on their faces made me so proud. The excitement with which they described their trip and the quest to go again tell me, maybe I'm doing something right. My kid's dad passed away almost 5 years ago. And this has been one of the many situations that I've had to face that is so different to my own life and had me asking, am I doing it right? When there are two parents, there's somebody to support you financially, emotionally, and physically. Somebody to confide in when you face parenting problems. And somebody to share the responsibility when your child messes up. But when you're on your own, everything falls squarely on your shoulders. The pressure becomes tangible, and it feels as if every step, every move, every decision is under constant scrutiny. I know that I can't do it on my own. It takes a village to raise a child is one of the most profound and true statements. When you're abroad and alone, you have to create your village. Every time we've moved, I've worked hard to create my support network. I've surrounded myself with people who support me, love my children, and are there for me when I need it. And I have been blessed with some of the most amazing people. Asking for help can be hard, but when you have the right people around you, you don't always have to ask. Raising kids abroad exposes you to a lot of criticism and harsh comments. You hear things like, you're a bad parent because you're not providing a stable home for your child in one place. You're depriving grandparents of the joys of their grandchildren. Or you're preventing your kids from making lasting friendships. I can't deny any of these. We've moved a lot, and we've had some hard goodbyes. And I wonder, am I doing it right? These criticisms led me to do some thinking and wondering. And I attended a talk by a woman who was raised as a TCK and who's now raising her kids as a TCK. And I came away with two important pieces of advice. The first was to stop asking third culture kids where they come from, because it's hard. Instead, I now say, where were you before this? The second and more important one was about creating a familiar environment, a home. Whenever we move, I put up our photos, our mementos, I find our chosen bedding and our teacups. All of this creates familiarity and stability. Even though the building is different, my kids know that it's home and it will always be there for them. I've lost count of the number of times that somebody has said to me, I don't know how you do it, and expecting some kind of profound enlightenment how I do it. When in fact some days, I don't know how I do it. And the truth of the matter is, I do it because I don't have a choice. There are days when I despair that I have broken my children, and I cry buckets over my mistakes and perceived failings. But we have good days too. And to move past the bad and to keep the good, we embrace open communication. We find time to sit down and talk about our day. We talk about our actions, the good and the bad, our expectations, our desires, our hopes. No topic is off limits. And this can make for some awkward conversations when you have an 11-year-old at home. But we persevere. I am also sure to never make big decisions without talking to the kids. If I think it's time for us to change schools, move apartments, I get their opinions and I give value to them. Even if I ultimately decide something they don't fully agree with, they know why I've done it. Am I doing it right will forever be a question that I face. And when I'm not sure if I'm doing it right, I remind myself that my kids can switch effortlessly between English and Chinese. They have friends from around the world, and they are able to see the world in a variety of ways. They have visited some incredible places, and they have had some amazing experiences, none of which I could afford if we lived permanently in South Africa. Living abroad requires flexibility and adaptability, and I am confident that my kids have these in huge quantities. I asked my children to rate our lives on a scale of 1 to 10, and I think that this shows I must be doing something right, at least some of the time. Thank you.